So hello everybody, welcome to this SUPboarder video. My name is Ruben and I'm going to tackle talking to you about the Starboard paddle range. I say tackle because it is a fairly big range of paddles. There is a lot of good sizes, constructions, shapes in there that suit all types of paddling. And to be honest, when you do look at the Starboard website, it can be a little bit overwhelming. And that's what I'm going to tackle in this video. Going to be talking about all the main points you need to consider when you buy actually any paddle, but really drive into which starboard paddle would be best for you, whether you're a beginner, an intermediate, whether you're a sup surfer, a tourer, a racer, absolutely anything. I'm going to go over it in this video. Have you got any questions and comments? As always, please get them in the comments below. And of course, if you've got any experience with starboard paddles, get them in the comments below because we always love to know your feedback. Now, before I get into talking about the blade shapes, the constructions, the stiffnesses, the diameters, the shafts, the weights, everything like that, let's go over a bit about Starboard. Now, Starboard, if you're unaware, are definitely, I would say, the biggest paddleboard manufacturer in the world. They make inflatable paddleboards, they make composite paddleboards. They also put just as much focus into their paddle range. And you will see some of the world's best surfers, tourers, racers, they're all using Starboard paddles. So in this video, I'm going to first talk about the blade shape and the blade size. That's two really important points you need to talk about. A point I'm going to speak about on their own is the shaft stiffness. And then the other points we're going to talk about, but they all sort of go at the same order of importance. The blade construction, the shaft construction, are you after a fixed or adjustable, and the actual shaft shape as well. So first off, let's talk about blade shape. Now this is a really important thing, but it's also a bit simpler to understand, or hopefully it will be when I explain it to you. Starboard make 3 different types of blade shapes. Well, there's actually 4 different types of blade shapes if you're talking about a SUP polo blade shape, but we're not going to be speaking about that. We're just going to be speaking about the main paddles in this video. And the 3 main ones are the Lima, the Enduro, and the Lima Toughskin. The Lima definitely aiming towards the racer or the faster paddler. The Enduro is aiming towards the all-round paddler, the surfer, tourer as well. And the Lima Toughskin is aimed at the more entry-level paddler who's trying to get a good value paddle to get them paddling efficiently and maybe paddling a little bit further. Now, the reason they fit in those categories is because of this. Now, the Lima has a much longer paddle blade itself. It looks a lot longer than the Enduro. It might not be physically longer, but it's definitely a lot thinner in its overall blade width, and it's got a much squarer tip to it. Now this paddle has a much nicer entry and exit. So when you put the paddle in the water, it feels very light and very smooth and catches the water very comfortably on the entry of the stroke. It delivers you a lot of power throughout the stroke because of its length, but then on the release of the stroke where you're taking the paddle out, it comes out the water nice and easily and feels very effortless to paddle, this paddle. Very effortless to put the paddle stroke in. And let me explain why Starboard have pushed the Lima towards more of a racing-based paddle. When you paddle with the Lima, you will naturally end up increasing your cadence, which means you'll end up increasing the speed or the repetition of your paddle strokes. Because the paddle enters the water really smoothly, it has a nice pull during the power phase, but as it actually exits the water really smoothly and really quickly, which means then you can recover your stroke and put your paddle back in the water. If you look at the Enduro, for example, it is a much wider base to the paddle, a little bit thinner on the top, more teardrop shape. Now that Enduro outline shape's been in the range for a long time. We've personally been using the Enduro for many years. We're all-round, our touring and our SUP surfing. Because of that wider, bigger base, it does offer you a slightly more stable paddle at the bottom section. So what I mean is, as you put your paddle in the water, it may not go in the water as smoothly as the Lima, but it will feel more planted and it will feel like it'll offer you maybe a little bit more power, but really it'll feel more stable in that power stroke. So when you're pulling your paddle back towards you or moving your board towards your paddle, that Enduro will feel really planted and solid, where the Lima maybe could be a little bit more technical to use because it's a little bit longer and thinner, but the Enduro isn't so fast to use. So you are not going to be doing so many faster, quicker strokes, not so high cadence. So that's why the Lima, with its faster cadence, is going to be pushing towards people moving faster across and on the water. Racers, fast SUP cruisers, fast SUP tourers. The Enduro is a paddle that's much more planted, as I said. It's much easier to paddle with. Maybe you don't need as much paddling experience to use the Enduro, but it's a little bit slower to paddle with. Therefore, it's better for surfing, it's better for touring, it's better for general all-round use. As I said, you could come into it as a beginner, and that's why they have the Enduro and the Lima in their paddle range to suit whatever types of paddling you're looking at. Now they've brought in the Lima Toughskin, which is a little bit of a compromise between the Enduro and the Lima, because if you look at the actual Lima shape of the Lima Toughskin, it's a much wider base than the classic Lima with this big square top. Therefore, it's going to offer you that little bit more stability and ease of paddling like the Enduro, but it has that slightly slender outline profile, easy to enter the water and release from the water, making your paddle feel really light when you're using it. And that's why they're really pushing that paddle more towards the beginner, intermediates. Maybe the paddle SUP schools have got them incredibly endurable paddle, which we'll speak about in a minute. A quick thing to note, you might just notice that if you're looking at the full carbon Lima, we'll be speaking about the constructions in a minute, the blade shape again is a little bit squarer on the full carbon opposed to one like this one here, the Tiki Tech. That's to do with the construction method and how it's made, but the blade shapes are very slightly different. Looking at the blade designs of all of the paddles, you'll notice that Starboard have really incorporated a lot more concaves than many other brands have out there. Most brands have got maybe a V going down the middle of the paddle. Starboard really have put a lot of concaves in the paddle blades themselves, on the sides, a nice big one here in the middle. They've also put a central V down the middle of the paddle, and all of that is designed just to give you as much support in the water as possible. You might have even been paddling when you're pulling the paddle through the water and it feathers through the water, it moves, maybe even hits the side of your board with the side of the paddle. That's all to do with the way the water is not being held in the paddle blade itself. All Starboard's paddles, whether you're looking at the top end pre-preg Lima, the Tiki Lima, the Enduro or the Lima Toughskin, they have a balance of concaves there in the paddle blade to give you as much support as you're pulling the paddle through the water. I cannot stress enough, these subtle tweaks do make a massive difference on the water. Yes, some other brands have got similar styles that will cut the water and hold it in a similar way, but definitely Starboard have the most comfortable paddle to use, and you haven't got to concentrate on your paddle stroke so much to get the most out of these paddle shapes. So I hope you've understood those three blade shapes. Most of you are going to be looking at the Enduro, there's no doubt, but definitely if you're moving into racing or paddling faster, maybe fitness paddling, look towards the Lima. And if you're new to the sport and you're a beginner and you want a really easy, tough paddle to use, but still comfortable to paddle, maybe long distances, look towards the Lima Toughskin. Okay, so moving on to the second most important point you must think about before you buy a paddle, and that is blade size. Now, the good news is the blade size is actually a really simple thing to understand. The smaller the person you are, the lighter weight you are, the smaller the paddle blade you're going to want. The heavier you are, the taller you are, the stronger you are, you're going to want a bigger paddle blade. They do several different sizes depending on what constructions you're looking at. The most common sizes you're going to find are large, medium, and small. In the shops, you will find other paddles, extra smalls, extra larges available as well. And that's also something to bear in mind. You might find a lot of these averagely will be in shops, but if you're after a specific size or a construction type, you might want to pre-order that paddle as well. But on average, small, medium, and large are the paddle blades you will find in the shops. I'm a good example. I'm a 75 kilo rider. I could get away with a medium or a small really, but I do like a medium paddle. Having a medium paddle is going to give me a little bit more power than if I go for a smaller base paddle. But if I went for a smaller base paddle, it wouldn't work my arms and my shoulders as much because I'd have a smaller blade. A few years ago, like 10, 12 years ago, I did actually have a Starboard Enduro Large, a big old paddle blade. But after an hour, my arms and my shoulders were completely shot. So definitely that paddle was too big for me. And I find a medium is the best balance for me overall. As a general guide, I would say if you are 70 to 85 kilograms, a medium blade. If you're 85 to 95, maybe 100 kilograms, a large blade. And obviously then up, you could be looking at an extra large. And if you're smaller, 75 kg and down to about 60 kg, look at a small blade. And if you're maybe 65 kg to 50, 45, definitely be looking at a extra small. Another thing to be aware of with paddle blades and their sizes, looking at smaller blades, they are going to be faster to paddle. So I bring in the word cadence again, speed of the paddle stroke. If you go for a smaller blade, you're going to have a faster cadence. If you go for a bigger paddle blade, you're going to have a slower cadence. That's why generally when you see bigger paddlers paddling hard, they'll always paddle slower and steady, maybe with a bit more power. But you have a lighter paddler, maybe 60, 68 kg, 70 kg, they'll be paddling much quicker, shorter strokes, and that's because they're on a smaller paddle blade. And that's the only other thing to think about with paddle blades. Maybe sometimes you might be, let's say, paddling sup surfing in strong offshore winds, or you're a sort of person who likes to do really quick, short, sharp paddle strokes to catch a wave, really quick, high cadence. Then you'll be looking better at a smaller paddle blade, so it doesn't work your shoulders so much. But if you find that you're happy and you're sort of more slow and ploddy with your paddle style, much more power but more slow, then definitely you're probably a bigger rider and you're probably going to be looking towards a bigger paddle blade. But if you're using your current paddle now, maybe after an hour and your shoulders are hurting, maybe your higher back is hurting, it probably means your paddle blade is too big. So get the surface area of that, and if you're looking towards a starboard one, go for a smaller blade than that. But of course, any questions or comments, please let us know, and also ask your local shop. They've got a lot of knowledge on what paddle blade size would suit what sort of paddler. Okay, moving on to another point which stands on its own, and that is shaft stiffness. Almost just as important as blades. I say almost because most paddle brands don't really give you the choice of what shaft stiffness you can have, and that's where Starboard do. And to be honest, this is where we get a lot of questions coming on. It's definitely our SUPboarder Pro emails. People are a little bit confused about where to look and where they sort of fit in the range, because Starboard do actually offer you a large amount of choice in their paddle range, and yes, it can be quite confusing, but they have given you that choice because they want you to have the best paddling experience on the water. So shaft stiffness, it's also very simple to think about if you think about it like blade size, and it does go hand in hand, shaft and blade together like this. The bigger and heavier and more powerful a paddler you are, the stiffer a paddle you're going to want. And the smaller and lighter you are, the more flexible you will want your shaft to be. This is mainly because you do not want to, as I said, with your shoulders, work your upper body too much by having a stiff paddle shaft. The advantage of having a stiff paddle shaft is you're going to find you're going to get more direct pull as soon as you put your paddle in the water. Very responsive. As soon as you pull your paddle through the water, you are going to initiate your board towards that paddle very quickly. Obviously, a more flexible shaft is going to bend, and it's going to slowly soften how that paddle applies the power, which is why it helps if you've got bad shoulders, or if you're a lighter paddler and you don't need too much weight on your shoulders. It really makes a difference with the shaft stiffness. Starboard have got 5 different paddle stiffnesses this year. 2 new ones, one at the most stiff end and one at the most flexible end. You're probably going to see 3, just like you will see a small, medium and large blade in the shops. You'll probably see 3 of these as the most common as well. The most common ones will be an S35, an S40 and an S45. Being the S40 being the most common, which is a medium stiffness. So the lower the number, the stiffer the paddle is. The higher the number, the more flexible the paddle shaft is. So S30 is the stiffest, S35, S40, S45, S50 being the most flexible. So if you're a super lightweight paddler and you're wanting an extra small paddle blade and you weigh 50 kilos, then you are probably going to be wanting to look towards an S50. Using me again for an example, I'm 75 kilograms. I use a medium enduro blade as my most go-to paddle, and I use an S40 stiffness shaft right in the middle there. If you're 90 kilos, 95 kilos, you could definitely be looking at an S35, and obviously if you're 110, 115, 120 kilos plus, an S30 will be the stiffest paddle for you. So just remember, shaft stiffness goes hand in hand with blade size. So if you're looking in a shop and they've got stock of some large lemurs, and you'll probably find that they'll already have them in S35 stiffness. Now just remember, these are general rules. Racers will probably always want to have maybe slightly stiffer shafts, but they might even still want to have a smaller blade. Maybe a SUP surfer might want to have the same thing, a small blade but with a stiffer shaft. Also in the shops, you may notice that if you're going to buy a 2 or a 3-piece paddle, they may offer those in a stiffer shaft, and that is because obviously when you have more joints in your paddle will flex more. So just remember, it is a general rule the whole time when we're looking at weights and shaft stiffness. It also depends on what type of construction and fittings that are on the paddle shaft as well to give it that stiffness. Next off, let's talk about blade constructions. Now, probably a lot of you out there are sort of constrained by the price point, so you generally will go for the lightest, best blade construction you can go for, which is absolutely true. You are going to get a better performance out of a paddle if you have a lighter blade, because imagine if you're moving the blade out through the water, through the air to put back in your paddle stroke again. That is all movement where you've got to hold your blade in the air. The lighter paddle blade you have, because it's the biggest lump on the end of your paddle, it does make a difference having a lighter paddle. So a lighter blade, a pre-preg carbon blade in this example, is the lightest blade that Starboard make. The top racers are using pre-preg. People who want the best surf performance were using pre-preg, and yeah, it just generally looks nicer and it's a lot easier and nicer to use. But it doesn't always mean that everybody should have that type of paddle blade construction. There's a number of examples where you might be looking to having a different blade construction. Obviously, if you really want to get the best environmentally friendly and eco blade, you're going to be looking at the balsa. Unfortunately, I haven't got any balsa blades here at the moment. That's a beautiful looking paddle. They replaced some of the glass cores with balsa. The weight of the paddle is still pretty good. I think it's probably one of the nicest paddles that Starboard make, and it's up there on price point. It's not as much as the pre-preg, but it's a little bit heavier than the pre-preg as well. But it's a nice paddle, good amount of performance, good amount of shape to it still. The reason I say that is because the construction you put into these paddles does change mainly the thickness of the paddle blade. So if you have plastic, in effect, if we use that as a material, you have to have a thicker amount of plastic compared to carbon. But carbon can be really, really thin, and that's why you will find the better paddles, again, better refined, better shapes, which work better in the water, will be full pre-preg paddles. But going for a more of a plastic type paddle, like a Tiki Tech, or we could even bring in the tough skin in the same sort of conversation, much, much stronger. It's going to be much, much better. Definitely if you're a whitewater supper, you're going to be wanting more of that paddle blade on the end. You might want a really nice shaft still, but you definitely want a durable paddle blade. The other thing is, let's say you are still paddling as a family. You yourself are sharing your paddle with lots of other family members. You want to paddle further at the weekends or on Sunday when you've got the board to yourself, but you've still got to share the paddle the rest of the week or the weekend with the family. You could go for a really nice lightweight shaft with a good flex for you and the rest of the family, but you could put a more hard-wearing Tiki Tech, or I said tough skin blade on the actual paddle, and therefore it can take the knocks, it can take the drags at the beach, it can take the sandcastle digging, and you haven't got to be too precious about it. Definitely over the years, I will say Starboard have been making exceptionally good Tiki Tech paddles. We've got some really old, I think 2015 Tiki Techs, and they still look pretty much as new. So really, I can stand up for that. They make very, very strong, competitively priced sort of paddles that I would say a real world paddler, a real family based paddler could actually use and still have enough performance, but still last the family knocks and scrapes. But then if you're not that sort of paddler and you want a paddle that's going to offer you as much performance as you can get for the money, you really should be looking at the UD Carbon. It's basically a uniaxial carbon strip that's going down the paddle. It's still got carbon in it. It's slightly different the way they have made the paddle compared to the pre-preg. It's still really light. It's still got the great blade shape like the pre-preg has, except it's a little bit heavier. So if you really want to go to pre-preg really, but you can't afford it, the UD Carbon is the paddle to go to. And I would happily paddle that paddle all of the time. And in fact, we've got that paddle and we do paddle with it quite a lot. And it's a really good price point paddle that won't break the bank, but gives you that enough performance, but not quite as much performance as the full pre-preg carbon. And going back on the Tiki Tech and the Lima Toughskin, obviously they are different shapes, those two paddles. The good thing about the Tiki Tech opposed to the Lima Toughskin is the back of the paddle of the Tiki Tech is still that nice, smooth shape. The Lima Toughskin has got reinforcing strips because it is effectively a plastic-based material. It has to have those reinforcing strips. So the back of the paddle isn't as efficient to paddle through the water as having a smoother back entry to the paddle. So the Tiki Tech is still a nicer paddle to paddle with, opposed to the construction of the Lima Toughskin. But the Lima Toughskin is a slightly different shape, which we've spoken about already. Another thing to consider, you've got shaft construction. Now, there's a few constructions that Starboard offer. They offer the full pre-preg one, which is obviously the one you're probably going to go with if you're going to go for the full pre-preg blade. They offer a pre-preg hybrid carbon, which is a great offering for a cheaper brace paddle that's still got a good amount of stiffness and the weight stays down. And then they've also got a filament carbon paddle, which is a great paddle that goes with the unidirectional, or they even offer that with the Lima Toughskin, I believe. So still really good weights of the shafts in several different price points, and remember you can get a lot of those in different stiffnesses as well. Generally the shaft thing isn't a massive thing, I think, when you consider, because people really go for it's the lightest shaft you can afford really, and going with the lightest paddle blade. But there might be a time where you might want to go for a certain paddle blade with a lighter shaft. Maybe, for instance, whitewater paddling, you want a super strong Toughskin or a Tiki Tech. Maybe then you might want to put on a more of a top end pre-preg carbon shaft. But bear in mind, if that's your sort of cup of tea and that's the sort of thing you're after, you're probably going to have to pre-order that. Most of them, as I said, with the paddle blades and the constructions, will be matched in the shops with the sort of types of constructions of shafts that they think they will averagely go with. While we're talking about shafts, another thing you can think about which Starboard offer, which it can be a little confusing, but it's really, really great to have, shaft diameters. Now, this is definitely one I would say pushing more towards the lighter paddlers. Smaller shafts are a real bonus if you have got small hands, because obviously your hand can get further around the shaft. You may not find you get cramp with it. If you're using your paddle in really cold conditions, you may be wearing gloves. That makes a difference, having a smaller shaft, because then you're wearing a glove means you're not holding such a big shaft in the first place. If you are a bigger paddler and you've got really big hands, you could obviously look towards the larger shafts. There's oval shafts, which are generally better for stiffness. Having an oval shaft, a bit like an egg, is much stronger in its forward and back motion than a round shaft. So if you're a really heavy rider looking for a super stiff paddle, maybe in an S30 stiffness with a big paddle blade, going for that in an oval shaft would give you the stiffest paddle shaft out there. So there is a few different types of shafts in there. Really though, I think it's more for the lighter paddlers, definitely looking towards a thinner base shaft. It really does make a difference, especially if you're doing longer distance paddling too. And the last point to talk about is fixed or adjustable. Now, it's not at the end of the list because it's the least important. It's probably there because most of you probably understand what sort of type of paddle you're going to go for. So obviously a fixed paddle is going to offer you the most performance because it's going to be the lightest overall, but it is going to need you to know what paddle height you are going to have. And if you first start paddling, that is a random sort of pick a number off your top of your head. You can have a rough idea, but really when you tune yourself into your paddling technique and what types of conditions you're paddling in, maybe the board you're paddling in, it can all change. So having an adjustable paddle is a really good place to start. You've got a few different options in adjustable. You can go for a two-piece, which basically means the top section just comes off. You can go for a three-piece, which means if you're, for instance, an ice-up paddler, you've got a board and a bag, you can take it in three sections and put it in the bag. And Starboard actually even offer in a few constructions the four-piece, which actually means you can take off the blade section as well to make your actual paddle even smaller again. Most of you out there, I think, when you're upgrading to another paddle, are probably going for the two-piece adjustable. So the main fixed section with one adjustable top section. That's probably because of price point, because the three pieces are a little bit more expensive. And also then having a two-piece over a three-piece is going to be lighter. So it's going to give you a good amount of performance, and the shaft itself is going to be a better flex generally than having a three-piece, which has got a joint right in the middle of the shaft. I will say Starboard do make an exceptionally good three-piece range. We put this in the full SUPboarder Pro test, and if you can afford it and you are traveling ice upper, the three-piece pre-preg carbons that Starboard offer are very, very nice. You can get them in all types of constructions, as in you can get them on Lima blades, you can get them in Enduros. So they do offer a really nice range of three-piece paddles, with the middle fittings being some of the best, or what I'd say the best on the market. The way they fit together with a push pin offset shaft there, clips together nicely, really well finished. The top sections of those paddles as well, you've got a few different types of top sections. If you can afford it, go for the paddles with the Tiki Super Smooth clamp. That's one with the groove down the top section, so when you clamp it back, it doesn't twist at all. The other clamp system is absolutely fine, but you will find you get better performance with the Tiki Smooth system. The handles of the paddles have all changed this year. You've got a really, really nice paddle handle. This is one that came out top in the test. The handle itself, much finer, better shape than any other handle you'll find on the market. Well, I'm sure some brand will say they've got a better handle, but we think the Starboard handle is up there, the best handle on the market. The pre-preg handles are obviously the lightest. When you're holding them, you can't tell the difference if it's a pre-preg or not. It's just the overall weight of the paddle because there's a fair amount of weight in that paddle handle itself. But it's nice to see that Starboard kept that paddle handle shape in the whole range in 2021. So there we go. I hope that's given you a bit of information about the Starboard paddle range. It is a little bit confusing when you do look on Starboard website, but remember Starboard do give you all of those choices because they want you to have the best paddle for you so you can have the best paddling experience. If I can give you a quick summary of the best paddles and who they should be best suited for, I would definitely say if you're a really committed paddleboarder, you're paddling at least once every 2 weeks, I do think you will get your money's worth out of a full pre-preg paddle. Yes, it's a lot of money, and obviously you can only go for it if you can afford it, but you will get that performance gain. If you are looking for a more all-round paddle to do all types of paddling, definitely look towards an enduro. If you are looking to just focus on paddling quicker, racing, fitness paddling, doing faster strokes, definitely look towards the Lima. If you are still committed but you cannot go to that full pre-preg price, look towards the full UD carbon. It's a very, very good paddle, very good weight, exactly the same blade shape, but it's a lot cheaper, so definitely the UD carbon. If you're getting into the sport and you've got a little bit of money to spare and you realize that paddling a good paddle will make a difference, definitely move on to the Tiki Tech straight away. It will be a better paddle. Or if you're moving up from a cheaper one aluminium glass paddle from some other brand and you can't afford to go towards the full UD, the Lima Toughskin is definitely the paddle that you could be looking at. Very easy to use, very, very strong, good price point and still not too heavy, and in lots of different adjustment types. Yes, when you get out on the water first time paddleboarding, you can paddle with any paddle. It will still work to paddle around in circles just off the beach. But there is a big difference, and you, even as a beginner, if I gave you a really nice paddle now, you would feel the difference and you would notice the difference even if it's your first time paddling. A few little things you can do if you go to a shop. A good one is the paddle handle trick, just to feel the differences between two paddles and to feel how much weight is in the blade itself. Just grab the handle of the paddle itself and just pull it up from the floor, holding just the handle. You'll find if you do two paddles side by side, you'll find the lighter ones will be much easier and will go in the air much quicker. And just think about that. Next time you're moving that paddle to do the paddle stroke again, that is all you're doing. You're moving that paddle around. So a lighter, more performance-based paddle is going to be more efficient for you to use. Lots of different blade shapes, loads of different constructions, loads of different stiffnesses, but they're all there to make sure you have the best paddling experience on the water. Any questions or comments, as always, please let us know. If you've got any feedback about Starboard paddles, please let us know. We can honestly say we've been using Starboard paddles for years. We're very, very happy with them, and they are definitely a well worth paddle brand of lots of different price points to look at for you in 2021. Hope you enjoyed that video, and we'll see you on another SUPboarder video real soon.